tu moi de. Et alors, mais...
𝐴𝐍𝐇 𝐒𝐞𝐬 안 그래 간도 조강가 나저베디 그래 하르가 못던 동키 절베디 𝐬 아르번나 오줌 한나 바이 강아 모를 날태 한가 거여러면 벌레 다스나 해전 심매 대강물 사절러베 행정학교도 나오고 실게 당물 가절러베 대우근데 최인가연도 대국고 조보 실내 담증당고도 저도베 내게리 선영 사강아 바이 강아 모를 날태 한가 허이러면 벌레 손에 동키 절레베디 우그러 온다 연마 실내다간 셔르근 도저도 여우다 겨우겠네 아대음도로 다르세 누르 동키 절 할둥 하르드그드큰 핫다 담증 하르근 도저도 여우다 겨우겠네 아름나 듣제 대강음 개선 황음의 한몰 아따 한가 허이르면에 벨레 뭔가 갈라승릭 물러가로 졸롱어르건타 어라건 동망언들 고대를 바양아 알테도 뜨금에는
Zum li ya la ya be la li la so mi li ya la se gi la ri che so mi li ya la se gi la ri Dare ya la de da la de ba so zende ya la mi la to je so zende ya la mi la to Tsidi ya la lo je la de ba so ya byom ya la ni ki la ka di so ya byom ya la ni ki la ka Chi ma ya la de wa la do ba o se So la mi ya la tu je la che so zam li ya la yo ki la zo ge so ge wa ya la re be la do Ji
loso datari ngachara 상암도지 투비 대중기 치도 아저라나 야갑난 계기 라로다 대중배 치주미 대중 다 대단 쪽투비 야갑 칠리 주미 라로 생게 대 남비 치주미 가라로 담바랑아리 카톨레 좀발리 소다 다시들리 주니
warm greetings, Your Majesty Giving 𝐶𝐶, Your Eminence 𝐵𝐻𝐷, Your Highness 𝐵𝐻𝐷, distinguished representative and religious heads from different schools, different Buddhist schools across the world, distinguished speakers, Buddhist practitioners, thinkers, presentators from across the world. We would like to warmly welcome to this gathering of the 5th International 𝐷𝐻𝐷 Conference in Bhutan.
당아자라 지당기 뒤세기 온도제대 달로줄레 샤마샤바 땡아지르기 다취 가라 공tum냠nen루 텐도니와 산사임베 다니기 본디기 디기 추기 공동다지쇼베 대다 대등 공tum냠nen기 꼴레 로주동다지쇼니세.
In the interest of time, amidst the gathering of all the practitioners and thinkers, as the 𝐷𝐻𝐷 Conference brings the both practical and theory, and in the interest of all the practitioners, I would like to impart a guided or a practical demonstration based on the 𝐷𝐻𝐷 meditation techniques.
다 담방아처라 남비 추공 중심배와진 대다자기 덤바 대상계 셔저 투바기 대 추기 콜로 름바 숨라서 바코로 제사치로 대된다 주도와진 대대주적이 타바니 수두이세.
In general, Buddhism was expounded by the universal teacher or the Bhagavad Buddha Shakyamuni. And irrespective of the profound teachings or the Buddha Sasana he has founded,
it can be summarized into two, the Sutrayana and Mantrayana, which both can lead to the salvation or liberation.
Tiani, Tarilam Dilu, Jutsengi Tabase, Nialam Dilu Debo, Sangandoji Tabase, the Sangi Chupungi Tijiton Tomche, and the Judegi Rambagi Dojin, Tani Nina Duise.
So these two yanas, or these two fundamental aspects, leads to the path to the liberation. And number one, the Sutrayana, or the foundation path, it emphasizes on the completion, it emphasizes on the perfection of the cause and conditions, whereas the Mantrayana emphasizes on achieving the goals or the achievement, which means a resultant.
The Tingilu Rilam Tsingi Tabasa, Yalam Selakomidu, Zumchiki, Pechi Shabachin, Penangachara Kantagi, Jabagi, Naledoji, then Zumchi Jogo Sachero, Tilu Kadim Chigunino. The Tingachara Garina Joachin, Kadim Chibehina, Tani Zumbegi Kabayu, the Tenalangalu Zumchibe Sachero, Gidegi Rimbagi Tindi, the Gidi Komalo Hivale, the Namduna Jodo Zumchi Kabayundigi, the Renam Danyalamgi Kabaselamiditoani.
These two methods forms a gradual process that can lead to the liberation. The Sutrayana is a gradual process. For example, if we want to visit the Buddha Gaya or the Buddha Sasana in Vajrayana, we can travel in two modes of transportation. If we travel or if we walk on foot, we may reach somehow, but it may take time. However, if we travel by aeroplane, we will be able to reach faster. So based on this, Sutrayana can lead to the Buddhahood, but it takes time. Whereas the Mantrayana, it is more faster, which includes both the upaya and prajna that can lead to reach the liberation faster.
Tari ngagi de rinam digi nesu na mila so nga che shenzom di de nyalam sanga doji tebe kolegi te ten so uteben digi de sanga ge kolegi lo juchi ma shunese.
So without further diving deep into esoteric practices, would like to touch brief on the Vajrayana perspective. Is this gathering is focused on Vajrayana meditation, Vajrayana conference based themed on science, mindfulness, and meditation.
Ngagi kordir zumchi besachero jagraphabi ki pintop sogi te gidegi stanye gi namba jajo dilo te khaba lesha yu lalo gini be jame lalo ke sumbe jame jire jame ngaraj dinto ya wala soba lesha yu te tinro yonso tabata gide jejabe onto che in te tenale gide tambo chagi chugi nejo gide sugi lojo etari mesho se nejo la medade lojo chishunise.
Vajrayana can be divided into many categories depending on the perspective of different schools. In general, Vajrayana or the Tantric can be divided into 4 Tantric. And without going details on the first, second, and third Tantric, His Eminence would like to touch on the Super Tantra, Uttarayana Tantra.
Da ne jola me da de loji de zumchi besachero tamba jubarachiba minche onle gutsukti ya teche gi dambe pargi parlo lamge rimba lesha yu de yesachero daringa charana tu tukuchina tesukara labgobe lojo mendo de tare zo gondu nyamnenda dewa de ya teche gi tidigi rimba le dumta chishunise.
Again, in the class of Uttarayana Tantra, again it can be divided into the the development stage and the completion stage. The development stage is primarily focused on ripening and awakening of our inner wisdom, and in a gradual process, and it can lead to the ripening or the accomplishment of the completion stage. So this would be little further elaborate on the completion stage.
다 조 나처럼 gondrunyalumbe mesuda dindigi 다 티디기 로조주니 데 티디기 로조 좀치베사처로 데다 지당아처라 기대수기 셰바님베 값수 투몽로 초시 데 투몽 마연발로 롭셰세 티기름바 니유 데 다링아처라나 민만 가라 데 규민바 담마 민바 가라치 가베벤디기 초시기 르베 데다
Now, in the development stage, it is important to get accustomed in the basic meditation or the realization of innate wisdom. As the gathering brings all the international and the local participants, irrespective of dim and fit or fit. So, in order to make wider sense for all the participants, His Eminence would like to touch on the common approaches that is applicable to all the practitioners, irrespective of beginners, intermediate or advanced practitioners.
다 롭시 투모 마임바디 데 수고바진 데 텔레상 아코렐람기 주고 온레 구츠데 텔레나레 뇽조 기출레름바 젠토뇽토 도사우다 데 뉴지기 티디 잡에 수고비 디인 사치로 가라다 gondonyalne tentonye mesanzame 투몽기다 곰 실라 곰탑 도드 점지 당하기 남아주니세.
So in the completion stage, as there is the practitioner the practitioner needs to be dim fit or needs to receive the complete stages of transmission and instruction. So in order to have a holistic approach or to start with a gradual process, His Eminence would like to give a guided instruction on the development stage and the completion stage for the beginners like us today.
다니 투몽기 온도제대 쇼와진 대담방아처라 벤나곰룹된 염솔렘발로 년도 좀 집에서지로 지인년도 난기년도 다사인년도 세름바지 도입이 다니 친난기년도 저속이 사종디 다토토 사지 대사종 좁사이 온도제대 자베베 대 신도 투몽 마연바 사인년도 담바랑아처라 융아 이승기 내 조카 잡니지 공주보다 안엘 마베른 바진도 도르지 쇼니죠.
Now, in the common practice, among many common practice, the most basic practice that the practitioner needs to partake is the preliminary practice or the ngendro. And if we go through first stages to the fourth, it may take time, but let us assume that we have completed the first stage, and next stage is to purify or to stabilize our body, speech, and mind. Now, in order to stabilize these three doors, His Eminence would like to impart a guided teaching.
배낭아절 류좀집에서지로 류치나 상승기 자의 연바 나좀집에서지로 나치나 상승기 자의 연바 이 셈좀집에서지로 아니 치나 상승기 자의 연바 아니로 류 연바 나 연바 셈 연바젤 야나 류람바 나람바 셈람바 담바 조라디 아날마베 구축티 때마 니질루름 바진토 답에 수고세.
So in preparation, our body, speech, and mind should be well fitted, or it should be make a dim vehicle or dim vessel in order to receive the teaching or in order to practice the ngendo. This body, speech, and mind, they are the most crucial thing that the practitioner need to advance into the practice. This body, speech, and mind should keep away or should stay away all sorts of distractions disturbing emotions. And in order to keep away, this mind should be stabilized so that it led the body and speech to function in a wholesome activities or in a correct way.
당아처럼 배주도 너들이 좋아진 리디기 치기 좋아서 밀리가 절럼 배나 리기가 저라 소저 보마 진람발라 소보 미기 좋아디 자고 파자 난기 좋아 더보배와 심편에 돕니 차진 고려 점니 아니 좀서야 자고 대상화 좀 치고 병을 거라 리닌디 남나 취딘 요하며 바치 자신나 다니 리겔따라 남이기 룽단 수기 잘리 메겨봐 취딘 리겔따라 요하며 바 자미지 델류기 지나 상승기 자와니 타자작 델류미오와 자고세.
The function of body, speech, and mind can be again categorized into three: the exterior, the interior, and sacred. In terms of exterior, it's quite easy that we should abstain or refrain from committing harm or violence through our body. And in a sacred, in a profound practice, when we sit down or when we practice, it is important that our body should be in the 6 or the 7 positions of Vajrayana, the practices. So these are the functions that our body needs to maintain during meditation or during practice.
다니 좀 배가디 좀 집에서 주로 진 참말라서 봐 미기 저바디 파자 난기 카틴데 졸라서 봐 뒤서야고 상와 타나 우기 동안 잠로에 대 받아서 가라라 진기 우 님들로 쪼가가네 매바 대소초 바유 담배 안에 배자미디 땡아디기 친나 상승기 자유 연바 님지기 돌려자 공급인세.
And second, in terms of speech, our speech should be free of slander, lying, in gossip, in physical, and in sacred, in internal. Even while reciting or even while breathing in and out, our speech or the speech should be mindful. We should be able to focus the breathing in and out, or we should be able to focus while even uttering a tiny or one single syllable of the mantra or the prayers. So these are the functions that our speech should be maintained while in practice.
다니 좀배 셈세로 이세로 아니 좀 집에서 저 이기 나선네선라 소바 미기님 파자 기 셈기 근도 차차외 봐 타나 셈디기 레베지 미지 나라 배사미기 라기 뛴다 코인 하다만다 마음비 dim미스 생활에 마음비 차지적 말마다 코인 야마섭지 다다와라 balance 점에 봐서 곰셈이디 로조기 아님제레 노란기 포스기제 됨에도 셈코리라진 도수 유마 법 칭이가 이미들로작 곰님마도 아차라 로기 때 포스우게 되자니민디기 상황 다다와 디좀집에서 주로 조 다다와래 때 조제다 저아니 셈딜로 치나 상승기 자에 얌바들로 셈 얌바이 이람바베티 이미오 셀럽사주루티 다마란 차잡디 땡년도 조고 내가 잘 취지다 버린 부치게 자자 첨부 공대 술용하기게 좀 망망세 숨미디 조 안에 술로 공대 송소위.
Now in the mind, in general, in any practices, our mind should be free of wrong view. The wrong view and the covetous and any that thoughts that bring harm to yourself and to others should be abstained. And again, in visualizing or in any practices, the mind is the main moderator, or it is the main engine that can lead the body and speech. It is said that if the mind is stabilized, or if the mind is well purified, well settled, or well maintained, it is spontaneously going to lead the body and speech in the wholesome activities. And also this mind, it is the one who drags us back to the past. Again, it is the mind who lead us to make castle in the air, thinking and planning for the future. However, coming to the practice, we should neither look back to our past nor plan activities in the future. Instead, we should focus in the present moment without any distraction or without being disturbed by any disturbing emotions or any kind of circumstances. So if this body, speech, and mind are in this discipline, then we are able to practice in a very correct and wholesome way.
rangi dungi namkhalo that singi gi tebiti pe mani le denche se tap ani gi tenalo dacha gi tumba jamesha cha toba kondo sere somen do tabo shechi chani e sanu in nyamja kula chugi namsum sewa taani chenda pechi gi gengi teba kule yuda yese samgi michawa chi chote chowa rangi dungi namkha gomchina yimik anil mi pache chitu tebe gomsachiro taanigi ngachara kirim gomdo da choti de semdi anile jankha majowa tigudi pada chu joda shumale yane yando de tilu nembebe de gomnigi rimba chi tale josachiro tup de time machin tachilami disugi jesuru de semdi khoragi nana lokta yekapsu semdi mingi kintogi jesu mandao luma tengi jesu maso tesim tanyom luma tento malyoba chitang khara sewa de session rebalo yi chengi se chitang lura de lolo da te tabe nyami tani da majawa zoche da ji sem rambab ji toto ja gomso sa chiru tu de jen tesube sa chiru male ram gerum bale sa jugo tinron masho na sanga teni chimbendigi da gomrim do du chite anibela bin.
Now, coming to the practical meditation or demonstration. So meditation can be done in any way with imaginary or with imagination or with visualizing a image or Buddha figurine just above your forehead. Or you can just emerge, you can just meditate looking inward or looking within yourself. Now in the case of in the first case, if we are beginner, we can just project or we can visualize a Buddha just in front of your forehead. Buddha in the right position, in the mudra, with sitting on the lotus, supported by the lion throne. So that with this projection, you can visualize, you can meditate, or you can recite the Shakyamuni Buddha mantra. And with this projection, you can practice everywhere. You can practice while seated, or you can practice, or you can visualize while walking also. And in doing so, it is also important, like as mentioned previously, that this body, speech, and mind should be in the right position. Your body in the 7 Vajrayana position, your speech purified and free from all impurities. Your mind not indulge or not mix with the wrong views or any ill thoughts or unwholesome thoughts. So this is the basic meditation techniques with projection or with projecting the Buddha image or the big Buddha's figurine just in front of your forehead.
Tiani ngachara toto miten chilo te ngomide nyamanda chagi temba jube kap gemo chilo tiani semchi tabboda te chesem kachilo do se sangi ke te moralo kana boda te tembe kulu semdo 대바진 철아지 제념병과 대뜸비 꾸드라 일로ten 곰세송 아니기 곰귤로기 일로주 대좀베 겸볼루룹네 볼루주베 마히조 실루티타베 값소에 대코냐 말레 메시지라 마히 소공고벤디게 대코레셈루 마히드라 대텐처라 아니라 곰소다 대코라테 딩이 숨숨베 나와서 대 아닐레텐디 대생모 추빌로주 아니술루 텐디 대미텐루 땡곰 탑라미디 조와니
The reason for this, the projection or the visualization techniques is based on the Buddha's lessons or the Buddha's teaching. When one of the disciples asks Buddha how to meditate or how to accustom with the meditation, then Buddha answered that which object or who you inspire or who you want to see the most or who you care or love the most, then the disciple answered that I have only you, that is Buddha. Then the Buddha said that means you can just visualize, you just visualize Buddha in your mind or in the forehead of your, in the above of your forehead. Then as instructed, the disciple throughout his life meditated on the Buddha, and it is said he had attained certain realizations. Again, secondly, during the time of Acharya Nagarjuna, he was again asked by a buffalo herder that he wanted to take a meditation, but he can only imagine buffalo, being he was a buffalo herder. Then Acharya Nagarjuna instructed him that you can visualize, just imagining or just thinking of buffalo or projection buffalo. So as instructed, he did, and he attained certain realizations. So this is how, if you visualize or if you project some kind of object that is qualified to be your object of realization or to be your object of protection and blessing, then that becomes your source of inspiration and your source of accomplishment.
벤낭아처라 창디 곰디 심기님 병원미디 대차 나처라 심기하니 베르 바탄시나 다 류가 이 숨셈이지 아니 쪼가슈세 다지다 신체도 와신 대심 쪼추데 하나레르 바기 대답에 값수 텐수 아니 벤디 곰주냠nen디 우시행을레 소 셈들로 뗀님 병원미디 아니 이세.
So through these stages of gradual practices, through development stage to completion stage, then you will be able to realize that among these three doors, body, speech, and mind. Of course, in initial, we may think that these three are equally important. Body is also important, speech also important, mind also important. But in essence, in reality, the mind is most important, most crucial. It is like a moderator that can tame or that can lead in either way, in a wholesome or in an unwholesome way. So we should always think that this mind is most important, crucial, and we should cherish it.
대지당아 저라가라 대다 공주 대날에 마초와 대심틀로 되니 유미되나면서 멜레좀인베 대심디 찔레고 노사다마신 레 심기라진 신이디 레라도 돈이 나처럼 자첩다 통마 매비 뒤에 들어오면 뒤미기 심지 뒤고 다시 마시기 켜바지기 뭐 마셔바진 켜바 담에베 뒤고시니기 탑로 소사주바장 류비 뒤고시바진 끼지 점진날로 디기라진디 시디 주조수 다팅 사주로 차야 주조메들로 오마게 때말레 람기름바스로 수오마진 마치르기기 디파 자인자인 티기라지 등에도 주르차노 베나시 살로윤디 nom루세미디 데과라 디기디기다 디파타치타치 티기라지 등에도 주르차노세.
So in order to purify this mind, it takes time, because what we are today is the accumulation or the result of our, be it purity or impurity of mind. From the beginningless of time, the sentient beings are all remain or sentient beings are subject to remain in this, the bondage of samsara, if our mind is not purified. And for someone, just by getting into practice, there may be someone who are much wiser and advanced level that within the short period of the practice, they would be able to purify that mind. It is the matter of just how we are dedicated, how we are diligent, how we are resilient to practice. The more we practice, the lesser our karma becomes. The nearer we approach to our destination. It is not that, it is just matter that how we practice. For instance, a gold buried in the earth for hundreds of years. The essence of gold has not lost, but it is just defiled by the earth outside. But the essence, it is just pure gold. Likewise, the essence and the innate nature of our mind is Buddha nature. If we nurture with practice, meditation, diligence, then one day or another day, or sooner or later, we are able to recognize or we are able to unveil our innate wisdom or the quality that we possess.
다니 도토기디 투모 롭시들로 텐데 곰탑도 주지 수사이 대 투모 마인비디기 림보와신 벤랑아자라기 다자기 뜸바 사주긴 타와지 사주로 대 줄로 내리더니 담도로 줄라서 바꿔왔지 대 자주 토비치 두가데베지고 대 안에서 뱅아자라 말레람게르 방윤도 레슈디 대디기 름바디 매베 름바진도 대답에 치조고 대대리 아주민데 다투문게 롭시 아님지 대 다들로 자시들의 세션인 줄 깔아로.
So these are the basic practices that the individual of us can approach as a common practices that can be deemed applied to all the practitioners. And for the completion stage, for instance, Buddha Shakyamuni, he has taken 6 years of austerities practice at the bank of Narayana River, and this austerities practices, it somehow signals that how we must dedicate or sacrifice, or how we must put effort ourselves into practice. It is not a self-mortification. It is rather an inspiration, or it is rather a kind of motivation for the sentient beings to lead us through this gradual process, from development stages to completion stages. So with this, to all the participants from across the world who have gathered today here, His Eminence have most auspicious and Tashitele for all the participants.
check. Hey, check. May I request silence, please? Thank you very much. After your long journey and safe arrival, it is our great honor to receive you for the first of the 16 scholarly Dharma sessions. I should paraphrase the great poet and adept Jigme Lingpa of the late 19th century, whose song of gathering, one of our renowned singer rendered this morning. We have come to this assembly, or in his imagery rather, landed on the tree, because he compared his disciples to peacocks landing on the tree. But a tree not that of wishful tree, but wish-fulfilling tree. And we have landed in this assembly, should I say, because of our correlated aspirations and karma, if we believe in that. It will be a very fruitful event where we find something, or in his phrase, where we can drink amrita, the nectar, that will ripen us and that will free us. In his poem on that gathering, of course in Tibet, but the object of his poem was a Bhutanese who became his chief disciple. In his poem on that gathering, Jigme Lingpa wrote about his meditative style, that even when he was not meditating, he could see the vision of his deities. Or even when he was not meditating, he was in a state in which his Dharmakaya appeared, or he experienced it. But you have also come to a place, if I may say, where a great guru who is reincarnated dwells amongst us today, this morning. So I am very overwhelmed to acknowledge most respectfully and most reverently the presence of His Eminence, Vairotsana Rinpoche, into our midst. As you know, His Eminence is the reincarnation or emanation of the first Vairotsana, one of the most significant disciples of Padmasambhava and Sri Sinha, and who, along with others, translated the Dharma into the language that is widespread in the Himalayas. Through Dzogchen lineage, that also enriched and was enriched by other schools of Vajrayana, Vairotsana laid the path of illumination for countless people since the 8th century. May I also say that we are so honored by his illuminating presence, because His Eminence is today in this assembly, which might be about 500 people, the youngest at 11. And that for me, at this age, represents hope in Dharma and scholarship far beyond our own humble lives. Now I took this opportunity because I am equally overwhelmed to welcome Her Majesty Royal Queen Mother of Bhutan and Her Royal Highness Aji Sonam Deshin Wangchuk. As you know very well from social media, Her Majesty Royal Queen Mother of Bhutan is both a writer and a social worker as the founder of Tarayana Foundation. And you also know that Her Royal Highness is a postgraduate of Harvard Law School and leads the Bhutan Law Institute here. It is truly an honor for the conference to have their gracious presence, which is in many ways unprecedented because royal families usually do not come to academic conferences. But it is a measure of how much the world has changed. At the same time, both Her Majesty Royal Queen Mother and Her Royal Highness have dedicated their lives to working with the marginal communities through Tarayana Foundation, which was established in 2003. And through their services, they have transformed numerous villages, providing housing, piped drinking water, education scholarships, healthcare, microfinance, and promoting, which I greatly admire, rural crafts that help village economies. I hope you will find time to visit the Folk Heritage Museum across the river, which was founded by Her Majesty, and that shows examples of traditional crafts and artisanal products that are being regenerated through her great effort. I also like to take this moment to recommend to you Her Majesty's 3 books that blend a memoir and history of rainbows and clouds, Treasures of the Thunder Dragon, and Dochula, a Spiritual Abbot. As a writer, Her Majesty the Queen Mother has elevated Bhutan's writers and poets through creation of the yearly mountain echoes for global literary exchanges. So I'm truly honored, and I would like to pay our revered respect to Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, and Your Eminence for your very gracious presence amongst us that makes this gathering quite special. I'm also honored, really, now, finally, coming to my real role as the introducer to the speaker or the chairperson who will introduce all of the speakers. I'm very honored to introduce Professor Geoffrey Samuel. In my humble opinion, he has dedicated his life to translating cultures rather than translating texts, which is a very different activity. In some ways, in my humble opinion, his work renews and continues the task started by Vairocana himself. but by other means adapted to the modern condition. There are too many works, and I cannot go through given this 5 minutes, but I would like to say that his recent works on Guru Rinpoche and how Guru Rinpoche's biography gets transformed over time through narrative changes deals with really not only biography, but also the question of historiography. And then there is also another work which is close to the Bhutanese, and that is his recent work on Terten Zilin Namkha Dorji's Terma text, which is known as 𝐶𝐸𝐴𝐞𝐻, the longevity cycle. It is a Terma text which was revealed during the reign of His Majesty the first King of Bhutan, Ugyen Wangchuk, from this very empowered land called Singhizong in eastern Bhutan, where Guru Rinpoche and several of his disciples gathered together to promote Vajraya Kilaya cycle. As a matter of fact, Zilin Namkha Dorji was hosted by the first king of Bhutan. So the connection is a very close one. Now he deals currently with health practices in Vajrayana within the broader aim of Buddhahood, because health by itself doesn't make much sense unless within Buddhist context it promotes Buddhahood. And the question also about the broader context of what is material, what is immaterial, what's body, mind, relationship, etc. And of course he has explored very profoundly through his edited book the concept and mapping of Beil, hidden land, of which Bhutan is a part, and perhaps the most continuous, unchanged one, linking sacred geography, myth, history, and the location also of the hidden land in our own vision, in our own views and perceptions, because it's not only external. To conclude, his earliest work, Civilized Shamans, Buddhism in Tibetan Society, remains the cornerstone of what we have come to know nowadays as Tibetan studies, also, although this term is used very loosely to include all the Trans-Himalayan region. Civilized Shaman, published in early 90s, I think was a breakthrough for the fact that it navigates and it makes our understanding a little more coherent. The boundaries between Buddhist Tantrism and indigenous or early religions that existed and still exerts a powerful influence in this land. His later works, The Origin of Yoga and Tantra, and Tantric revisionings further demonstrated his genius in synthesizing vast historical and ethnographic material in very new frameworks. So I'm very glad to conclude that he is one of the most distinguished and influenced Vajrayana Buddhologists, if we may say so, for our time, and whose profound works that connects anthropology, religious studies, and lived practices are very vivid. And I welcome once again to our forum Geoffrey with deep respect and gratitude, because you have traveled very far to attend this conference. Thank you very much. I now welcome Geoffrey.
very grateful to my old friend Dr. Kamura for that very impressive introduction. Can you all hear me clearly? Right. I'm not sure I entirely deserve all of the praise that he heaped on me, but anyway, here I am. I'd also very much want to recognize and acknowledge the presence of His Eminence 𝐕𝐻𝐻 Rinpoche and Her Majesty the Queen Mother and Her Royal Highness 𝐶𝐻 𝐸𝐿𝐻𝐻, and the many very distinguished teachers, scholars, and other people who are here with us today. This is an incredible assembly, and we already had a foretaste of this with the Dorje Lapun's very impressive introduction and summary of many of the key points of the Buddhist teachings earlier this morning. I'd actually also been thinking of the Jigme Lingpa song that we heard, which is one that I got to know a few years ago, and its reference to the power of bringing together an assembly of people who have a common purpose, such as this one. So, as I think most of you know, there's been a bit of a change to this morning's program. In particular, Tanya Singer, who is going to be speaking immediately after me, isn't able to be here. I gather she may be here later in the week. Okay, is that better? About. Okay. Okay. Of the people on the amended program, Christopher Sen is also not speaking. So this morning's session actually has 3 speakers after me. That's Francis Tisa, Eli Yelens, and Nadav Amir. 2 of whom are people who are already. Francis in particular is an old friend who I've known for many years, and I think could be given a very impressive introduction at least the length that Dasha gave me. And many of you will already know of his work, both as a Tibetanist scholar, beginning with a doctorate on Milarepa, and work on the early Milarepa tradition, and his subsequent work on the Jalu, the rainbow body, which is most probably his best-known recent work. People are probably familiar with him, with his work on Christian-Buddhist dialogue, because he is, of course, a Catholic priest as well as a Tibetanist scholar, and somebody who has done a great deal, I think, to help people on both sides of that particular interfaith relationship to understand more about each other. And he's also very much a spiritual teacher and an accomplished poet and writer in his own right. So that's Francis, who is our first speaker today after me. Both he and Eli Yelens, who's an independent scholar practitioner, who I met some years ago when he was at a somewhat earlier stage in his career, and is somebody who has been involved with the Center for Buddhist Studies in the past, is an active Buddhist practitioner in the Longchen Nyingtik tradition and has a very wide experience of a variety of Buddhist and other spiritual traditions. So he again is somebody who shares this kind of ability to work across disciplines, across ways of experiencing the world, which I feel is very important at this point in time. And I'll say a little bit more about that when I get to my own paper in 2 days' time. But the third speaker, and perhaps I should just check, is Nadav Amir here? Oh yeah, right. Nadav, you don't seem to be in the book of abstracts. Yeah. Yes, so I'm afraid I can't say much about what an impressive person you are, but I'm sure we'll all get an opportunity to learn more. And the general theme of this morning's session, though, is worth commenting on a little bit. As you know, it's entitled Buddha Meets Algorithm, Two Truths, AI, and the Future of Emptiness. And my initial thinking was, looking at this is a rather interesting place to start a conference. Thinking about it more, I think it's actually a very good place because it throws us right into the middle of the contemporary world. And the encounter with AI, with artificial intelligence, is clearly something that's going to have an enormous impact on our world. It's already beginning to do that. Whether we like it or not, the Buddhist tradition, the Vajrayana, is now operating within that environment, and more is going to have to operate within that environment. So I think the ability to come to terms with that, to discover what this new presence within the world of knowledge, whether it's the world of intelligence or sentience, I don't really want to say as yet. I don't think I'm competent to judge, and I don't think we've quite got to that point anyway. This is where we are, this is what we have to deal with, and I think the ability to see what positive potential might be in this development is also really important. It's rather easy to see AI as a threat, as something that adds to the general confusion of samsara, that helps to make us even less clear what's going on around us and what reality might be. What reality might be, of course, has always been something of a Buddhist issue anyway. So I think to contemplate this relationship with things that are happening on the frontiers of science and on the frontiers of our society is really important for an occasion like this. And I think there's quite a bit more of this later in the program that engages in various ways with the realities of our world. Because if the Vajrayana has a real potential to continue to transform, enlighten, awaken in the future, it has to do so, it will have to do so in relation to a changed world of changed people who have grown up in something that is quite unfamiliar even to people like me who grew up in the 1940s and 50s, you know. So perhaps that's enough from me for the moment, because I don't think it helps for me to try to summarize 2 papers on the basis of abstracts, and one of which I actually don't really know anything very much at this stage, beyond saying that clearly all 3 of you are working on making linkages between the Dharma and scientific ways of understanding knowledge, Western philosophical ways of understanding knowledge, consciousness, and reality. And that's a really important project at this point in time. So, again, welcome from me to the first session of this conference, the first academic session of this conference. And perhaps I can call on the first of our speakers to come forward and present his work. Francis.
otherwise it will interfere. But anyway, I'll hold it like this. Good morning, everyone. And I suppose one should say, Kusu Zangpol La. And really honored to be here. See some people who are even very, very good teachers of my own, 𝐸𝐻𝐶 𝐂𝐞 here, and many friends. I hope that I can offer a few reflections. Tanya Singer, I'm sure, would have been a far better person to take the first place. She is a long-term scientist involved with mindfulness and compassion. She is a Mind and Life inspiration. I'm on the board of Mind and Life in Europe, so in some ways my ideas this morning will reflect not so much my own, well, to some degree my own research, but also the kind of work that's going on today in the area of meditation, neuroscience, and philosophy, and applying that to the challenges presented by artificial intelligence. So I hope this is helpful in some way. Overwhelmed by the extraordinary progress in data processing made by AI systems in recent years, some speculative thinkers have extrapolated a situation in which the highest human aspirations could be fulfilled with assistance from or collaboration with artificial intelligence. Some even speak of the fusion of the human mind with AI, without as yet linking that proposal to the kind of contemplative training that the great Jetsun Milarepa, for example, taught his disciples so that they might blend their minds with everything that is manifesting in the field of perception. These speculations are unfortunately based on a misunderstanding about the way the mind has come into being. A manufactured system, even one that can learn and improve itself, has undergone an evolutionary track that is dramatically different from both biological and human evolution. For this reason, the advice that an AI might offer to the person seriously committed to a spiritual quest, and obviously here we're not talking about someone diligently writing a paper for their psychology class, okay? This is something else, all right? Will inevitably reflect the limitations of its own manufactured evolution, the artificially contrived and selected information inputs, and the interactions that the AI has already had with other AI systems and human interlocutors, all of which are going to have their unique perspectives and interpretations of the data. We notice the following, just a little quote from a BBC article. This new system of AI they're talking about is a large language model, or LLM, similar to OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google's Gemini. The systems are fed huge amounts of data and trained to spot patterns within it. They use this data to create passages of text by predicting the next word in a sequence. Despite the systems being labeled intelligent, critics argue LLMs do not think, have no understanding of what they produce, and confidently present errors as fact. Tech companies argue that they need more data to make the systems more reliable. And in this little paragraph, you begin to see some of the problematic aspects that need to be addressed. AI is inevitably a mirror of the collective efforts of human minds of a certain type and background to gather and interpret information. It is lacking, however, in the category of experience, since it can only imitate the way human beings express awareness of experience, memory, and embodiment. The absence of embodiment and sensory input places severe limits on these constitutive elements of cognition. Unfortunately for an AI system, any input about transcendent or mystical experience will have to be hearsay evidence with no basis in the actual track record of the AI device. In the evolution of an AI system, what constitutes growth or maturation is restricted to the volume of data acquired from other similar sources of information. Information technology was built on the notion that a brain is a device for processing discrete bits of information through comparison and correlation. There is no moral content and no basis for ethical constraints or restraints. Indeed, no bodhisattva commitment. Whatever else it may entail, contemplation is about direct experience of transcendent reality. It is the outcome of certain kinds of mind training and practice based on experience and the training relationship between master and disciple. It is also a state or condition at the ground of consciousness itself, which is why some traditions speak of knowing or recognizing the state that has always been present, even if covered over with mistaken thought patterns. AI, by contrast, is a mass of data organized to imitate the ordinary thought patterns of a very intelligent person in a highly restricted way. You've all heard, I think, of the so-called hard problem. All right, the hard problem: how does consciousness arise from a material matrix, from a brain, right? From the evolution of the nervous system. This has been taken up by a number of authors in our Mind and Life world. Michel Bitball, Evan Thompson, and others have taken this up. Evan Thompson has written a very substantial book, Mind in Life, all right, published in 2010, more recently than that, 2024, on the very subject. Now, does consciousness, therefore, arise from a complex sequence of interactions within the tissues of a mammalian brain, or is consciousness a prior condition for the possibility of the very existence of matter and energy and their complex interactions? If the latter, then AI can never really be conscious. This is what Michel Bitball argues. Reflecting on both the perspective of the Japanese Kyoto school, which brought together German philosophy and Zen practice, and the phenomenological tradition in Europe, Michel Bitball reminds us of the problem of pure, undifferentiated experience, which must be addressed before we can approach the hard problem. He says, pure experience, in the sense of Nishida, the founder of the Kyoto school, pure experience has no meaning, no intentional polarity, unlike the elaborated consciousness that Husserl spoke of. It is simply there, naked, uninterpreted, and uninterpreting. It is because they do not give enough importance to this ultimate level of being that many scientific researchers and philosophers of mind remain plunged into confusion when they speak of consciousness. For if one can legitimately envision a future explanation by neuroscience of the cognitive functions attributed to consciousness, then pure experience, which has no function but a simple presence, offers no object accessible to their methods. The current pure experience of researchers remains the unspoken presupposition and the blind spot of all knowledge. Let me just give you a little tiny example. Have you ever woken up early in the morning, all right? You people who meditate far better than I do. And before you're ready to get out of bed, and there's a little bit of a moment in which your body is very still, and you don't want to move, and you don't want to think, and there's no complication, and you're just there. This is very close to this, okay? Very close to this, I hope. I hope. And sometimes that happens, you know. Moving towards a deeper understanding of the contemplative experience, Bitball further observes, pure experience as a basis or ground, 𝐶, right? We're talking about 𝐶, in Longchenpa's sense of 𝐶, okay? The basis or ground of what we call consciousness permeates things that show themselves without actually showing themselves. For experience is the name of appearance itself. Realizing pure experience, therefore, requires reversing the direction of the search. Instead of taking a step forward toward the objects of knowledge and grasping, it's a matter of taking a step back to merge with the inner life where the prerequisites of knowing and grasping can be found. Realizing pure experience requires not seeing things from a particular place, but simply remaining, dwelling here, in this element that has no other location than being the center. Such a perspective is antithetical to the workings of technological devices, even when they're turned off. Now, taking this perspective even further, Raymond Panikkar, a close reader of Heidegger, notes that what we must underscore here is not the analysis of the experience, but its mythical character, which amounts to recognizing its primordial irreducibility. Right? It's very persuasive. Any experience, sensory, intellectual, or spiritual, in fact, functions as a myth, performs the same role, and presents the same structure. This means that the entire complex of human awareness is permeated with an invisible field of pure experience that cannot be reduced to anything else. However, when we become aware of this pure consciousness arises as experience, and that experience impels the human person to express itself in the form of a conviction that one has encountered something absolutely true. No matter what occasioned that conviction, what matters is that one cannot refuse the mythic validity of the experience, because it stands as a validation not only of itself, but of every perception of any phenomena. Thus, Edith Stein, a leading student of Husserl, could spend a dramatic night reading the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila, and at dawn place the book on her desk and say, "Ich habe die Wahrheit gefunden." I found the truth. I found the truth in that reading experience, which was convincing. And also in the Madhyamika system, each moment of conscious awareness of the sequence of phenomena is a moment open to nirvana, of enlightenment, of the attainment of Buddhahood. Thus, there is certainly a conscious experience that presupposes a basis in pure, undifferentiated experience, free of both subject and object, yet compelling a response that is structurally mythic and life-altering. This open experience is the foundation of what we'd like to call the contemplative experience, or simply contemplation. In a sense, it corresponds to Longchenpa's emphasis on the basis, the 𝐶, the 𝐶. We're now obliged to do some analysis for the sake of clarity. And so I apologize for being very philosophical right at the start. Thus, I'm offering a tripartite analysis of consciousness, contemplation, and AI on the basis of distinct tracks of evolution or development. And this may be easier for all of us to grasp. Biological and neurological evolution. We see in Pierre Luigi Luisi's book, Emergence of Life, that although it is possible to devise likely candidates for the first living organism, with his experiments, I call them with greasy bubbles. You know, there's sort of these spheres of a lipid chemical and then have amino acids inside. Life never actually emerges in the laboratory. And we're always left with pieces of, as you well know, Nagasena's chariot. Moreover, if life emerged only from combinations of molecules, why doesn't it emerge over and over again in the 4 billion years of Earth's geological history? In biological research, we can describe co-emergence in terms of the co-evolution of contained packages, cells with membranes of living organisms within a mutable environment, both constructed by and more or less favorable to the ongoing life of the living organism. Evan Thompson's book, Mind and Life, addresses this problem by describing an inactive approach to the emergence of life based on the self-organization of the primordial living cells. This is the idea of autopoiesis, all right? That in some ways living, that pre-living organization of materials, chemicals, biochemicals, and that, come together in certain ways because of the laws of physics operating in the molecules that you're dealing with, and also the interaction between those molecules and everything that's going on around them. What is within the cell and the environment around the cell are in continuous co-evolution, one impacting the other in very dynamic ways down through the 4 billion years since the emergence of life on Earth, which, however, remains something of a mysterious singularity in spite of all that Professor Louisi has tried to demonstrate in the laboratory. Closely allied to this basic model of coevolution or enaction is the emergence of a nervous system of increasing density and complexity. What we see in the human brain and nervous system, accompanied by hormonal cascades and fluctuating blood flow, is the most complex manifestation of autopoiesis, that is, self-organization, on our planet. Now then we come to technological evolution. The development of computers since the punch card era is something that I've been able to observe personally. I can remember being 14 years old and seeing an entire room filled with a computer into which were fed thousands of paper cards. Some of you may remember this world. And then there were the first typewriters with memory and the 6-inch floppy disks that I used to write my dissertation about Milarepa, and then the more rigid 3-inch disks, and then the first PCs and Macs. The World Wide Web, the endless updates and viruses and passcodes, and the penetration of every aspect of life by this technology, ever pushing the limits of the capacity of microchips to encode information. This evolutionary track has had, in a very short time, an exceptional impact on civilization's self-understanding, giving rise to the emergence of what Teilhard de Chardin might call a technological noosphere. A noosphere, that is, the whole world has become kind of a mind, a kind of sphere of mind. Nous in Greek meaning actually intelligence, understanding. Technology has also influenced scientific thinking about the human brain. By the 1970s, and this is one of the problem areas, by the 1970s, we had theorists trying to show that the human brain is nothing but a wet computer, and if so, that it should be possible to construct a gigantic computer that would match and even surpass human intelligence. Noam Chomsky's students at MIT were already aware of the challenges that would have to be faced. Some of my friends at MIT at the time were working on the problem of teaching a computer to translate from one language to another, even if the original text had been written with minor grammatical errors. The computer, ever a perfectionist, would disallow the translations from imperfect texts, the meaning of which a normal human mind would know intuitively how to understand. The challenge was to teach a computer to understand a flawed statement, a very difficult task in a laboratory dominated by analytic philosophy, that is, parsing of meanings on the basis of grammar and semantics. In part as a result of the human mind being overwhelmed by the information generated by computers, there emerged a corresponding need for a superhuman kind of intelligence that can handle vast bodies of data. This gave rise, perhaps prematurely, to the idea that such a structure might attain consciousness. Not only was the definition of consciousness never adequate to the phenomenon, but also the theory was flawed from the start. No one had actually proven that there is a neurological mechanism from which consciousness arises in a biological system, solely on the basis of exponentially enhanced connectivity, blah, 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 right? You just get lots and lots of data from this model. This model, called cognitivism, has been called into question by the enactivist school of thought. So Maturana in Chile, Francisco Varela, Evan Thompson, and their colleagues. Some of the friends of enactivism still maintain that consciousness arises because of the immense development of connectivity among neurons. Tanya's father, Wolfsinger, maintains this position. However, the fact that neuron evolution is inseparable. Have I come to the end? Yes. I did, okay. Well, then I'll just give a conclusion of that. So the idea here that I want to get across is that if you contrast these two kinds of evolution, you realize that possibly AI could undergo a shift on the basis of its own processing of information, change its own ways, and change those who designed it so that a new approach might be reached and spiritual guidance might even be possible. For the moment, though, all we have is a very good encyclopedia. Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much for that, Francis. I think that's brought us off to a very impressive start and raised lots of issues that people are, like some of you no doubt are already thinking about, and many of you will be stimulated to think further. So if Eli Ernst is ready to come up, we'll move on to the next presentation.
So thank you, Dr. Samuel, also to you, Father 𝐶, and to everyone indeed. Thank you to the organizers for agreeing to let me speak here once again. Dr. Samuel may remember with some either nostalgia or residual annoyance that I followed Father 𝐶's lead in going over the first time you chaired a panel on which I was speaking. I will do my very best to avoid that mistake again. I make no promises. So, basically want to discuss epistemology, specifically as it intersects from the Buddhist, more particularly in our case, the Vajrayana tradition here, with its counterpart of Western origin. Really hard to say it's any longer, strictly speaking, Western, but we can just call it, sort of the international cosmopolitanized notion of philosophy that's taught in English language and many other European language schools. So at the intersection of these two traditions of epistemology, there is significant overlap. I'm arguing enough to help provide a deeper ground that we can step back to mediate and encourage and resolve difficulties in the ongoing dialogue between Vajrayana and the community of scientists that study it, and the collaboration between members of those communities. Where we are right now, and as indeed the theme of this conference shows us, that this dialogue is now firmly established and making continuous progress, not just in a direct line, but it's proliferating into various other or various additional subdisciplines and interdisciplinary inquiries. In the past 20, 25 years of progress in this mutual endeavor, the accumulation of evidence, right, of empirics at least, is now no longer any sort of significant shortcoming, as it was in the early days when most of the speculation that brought people together in the kind of dialogue we're having here now focused on. But with thousands of studies, tens of thousands of published papers, able to be compared, contrasted, have their data and their arguments pitted against each other, ever refining the confidence in the resulting knowledge that results from this. Well, we don't have to worry too much anymore about asking the question of whether it's a viable and worthwhile endeavor. What remains, however, are open questions about the future pathways it may take, the questions of emphasis on which research programs deserve or at least warrant some degree of priority, either logically or in terms of time and attention spent teaching them, funding them. The same kinds of debates that mark every other field of science. And of course, as many proper scientists, those who practice it daily, will tell you, they don't necessarily need philosophers to weigh in on their activity, much as a bird doesn't need a bird watcher. However, the philosophical overlay is for the rest of us, right, to help us interpret how we may understand, integrate, and make use of the findings. So with accumulating evidence obvious and available to anyone interested in the intersection of contemplative science and its practice, Buddhist or otherwise, some of the limitations now are at the level of theory. Although the Vajrayana science dialogue has matured considerably, it still remains in a transitional phase or a transformative phase. So I don't mean to suggest that there's any instability there, just that developments that occur now still at this phase of the relationship can have far-reaching consequences of path dependency, as it's often called in science and philosophy. The consequences that are outsized compared to the significance of the events or the interpretations of the research output that led to them. So let us proceed confidently, but with due care. So evaluation of scientific research programs occurs from within the discourse itself, just within the publication and pitting and argument of findings and the theories used to guide and explain them among those devising and conducting the experiments themselves, but also in the philosophy of science literature. And it's that layer of inquiry that connects the scientific endeavor to other areas of scholarship, to the popular imagination, to policy. It provides, at its very best, a common frame of reference, a set of ideas, not to crystallize the debate, but just to provide a standard vocabulary about which to argue about, right? We may not agree on everything, but let us at least agree on the terms by which we will disagree. Let us at least strive for clarity in our disagreement. If we're going to disagree or agree, let us be sure that we're doing so about the same objects, those that we intend. So, knowing that the relationship is fruitful, these general depictions of Vajrayana as a whole, of science as a whole, is often remarked. There's as much diversity and plurality within each of those labels to override any noteworthy distinction between them. So, just as a caveat, let's not overemphasize the difference between the concept of Vajrayana or Buddhism, when in fact there are so many varieties and so many different perspectives and outlooks within it. Same can be said of science. This is why we need sort of a unifying epistemic philosophical layer of discourse to help us make sense of this variety, this plurality of perspectives. And so, yeah, how do we ensure that we understand each other maximally? How do we make sure that our arguments and that our conceptions, that our perspectives are sort of mutually intelligible, maximally so, just as one seeks to understand another natural language for mutual intelligibility, so it is with the conceptual vocabulary of philosophy bridging a tradition like Vajrayana, which has its own rich philosophical and empirical basis, derived from the direct personal experience of thousands of practitioners over well over a millennium now, alongside the tradition of science with its underlying philosophical epistemology of naturalism or positivism, if you will. We'll get into the specifics of those in a minute. And its corpus of observations of data. So it's in seeking that mutual translation layer that I bring up the topics of this presentation. And so other purposes that can help here are just to better facilitate how we apply or implement the findings of the research, so as not to overstate their relevance nor to overlook or diminish them. Just, again, greater precision, greater clarity. Connecting the findings in terms of their methods, in terms of the evidence collected, in terms of the success of experimental design, and in terms of the significance of the interpretations, how to connect those to other fields of study and learn from those to enrich further efforts. Also to streamline how it's taught, right? I mean, the accumulation of knowledge is all well and good, but if it can't be adequately transmitted in direct proportion to its accumulation, well, it means that we're leaving out an important couple of steps. And also to expand the discourse, to wider audience outside of the specialists that can then apply them. And so, otherwise, what are some other answers to the question of why? What's the purpose of deepening the discourse in this way by focusing on, the layer of epistemology? Well, just to help us refine and make sense of the layer of theory that we use to guide, organize, and connect the empirical findings that are so abundant now, to clarify their implications, and to avoid any unnecessary contestation and controversy. Now, the pursuit of scientific inquiry necessarily entails, contested interpretation, argument, controversy. And insofar as we're doing that anyway, well, we should avoid any unnecessary aspects of it. And so, without epistemically informed higher order theory, we run the difficulty of the accumulating evidence from the various neuroimaging studies, other directions in psychology and cognitive science that don't necessarily rely on neuroimaging but have relevance for it. We run the risk of these different varieties of studies becoming sort of islands of findings that they admit to some higher level integration, but that can only take place at the level of sort of an overarching unified theory. Now that involves conceptualization, of course, and this is the area in which the existing vocabulary of epistemic debate from Vajrayana's tradition and from the so-called Western, now just sort of internationalized philosophical tradition share common ground. They're really not so different, right? Rather than keep relying on the term Western as it's often still referred to in the literature, in order to avoid a controversial term, one useful strategy is to make up a neologism with some Latin in it. So instead of saying Western, I turn to a term Occidentic, right? Refers to Western, but not to overemphasize it or reify it. It just means, has vague connections to the history of the development of those ideas and what we once called the West. So this tradition with Vajrayana's own epistemology, rooted back through the two truths that many in this room are already deeply familiar with, starting from the Indian tradition, Dignaga, Dharmakirti, Chandrakirti, through the debates between the Prasangikas, the Madhyamikas. It turns out there is a surprising degree of overlap, but still enough important differences to keep it interesting. enough to shake up our own approaches to it, to shake up our own interpretive frames, that we might learn something new. So, assuming that everyone will be more familiar with the underlying interpretations of what counts as valid knowledge from a Vajrayana perspective, I'll give a quick primer of some of the main concepts of philosophy of science. Again, I'm not trying to persuade anyone of a particular argument. I'm just trying to lay out a couple of general concepts around which we can continue to think together about this material, and hopefully that can frame some of our understandings of the remaining topics, remaining content brought up in other subsequent speakers' presentations throughout the conference. So basically, philosophy of science is dealing with the relationships between our explanatory theories of why phenomena take place and have the dynamics and the relationships that they do, what constitutes the evidence on which we justify saying those theories are valid or useful, and then by what mechanisms of experimentation or collecting data and subjecting them to conceptual testing we can use to say that the evidence is good or not. Simple enough, right? There's no need to go through all of these. I list just a couple of columns of ancillary considerations that fill the literature of debate and argument in philosophy of science. We'll notice that with a few exceptions, these are all contents that can be found in treatises on Buddhist epistemology, going back the better part of 2,000 years. The notion of validity, what counts as valid inference, what counts as a valid relationship between an observation or perception and a concept, the notion of measurement, how do we identify, quantify different observations and fit those into explanations. And then what are the criteria for saying that an explanation is accurate or not? How do we falsify it, in other words? And whether we do that or not, well then, how do we generalize the resulting claims to knowledge into other fields, into other tests, into other bodies of evidence? Thank you. So the main perspectives here, I'll just sort of gloss over these since time is growing short. Usually, learning philosophy of science, we discuss the insights from the philosophers Karl Popper, who emphasized falsification of weak theories to drive the improvement of stronger ones. The more socially and historically minded philosopher Thomas Kuhn, who emphasized that there are irrational factors shaping our understanding of scientific progress. And the most recent, Imre Lakatos, who helped us learn how to distinguish between research programs, combinations of theory and evidence that are making progress versus those that are sort of stagnating or degenerating. And so the central debates basically hinge on how to justify claims to knowledge. Again, if you want to dig into this, find me after the talk or read the resulting paper. But with the time running out, there's not a lot of ground to cover on these details. Suffice it to say that these distinctions are also reflected in the history of Buddhist epistemology. In particular, it's worth noting that the Pramanavan view, for example, was an example of what in the West we would call foundationalism. Madhyamaka reflects a perspective in Western philosophy we would call coherentism. Just to make the point that there's a lot more overlap between the two systems than is often supposed. This is not to say that we can take the equivalence as unproblematic, just that there's enough ground to persist. So, to close, having argued that there's enough common ground in the philosophical underpinning of how each tradition justifies the accumulation and claims of knowledge and how findings relate to each other and enhance our understanding, and how we can go about arguing about such notions profitably instead of unproductively, then what are some examples of untapped potential, of directions that the relationship can proceed? So the evolution of the field of systems theory and scientific endeavor has been extraordinarily profitable for multiple fields spanning molecular biology through applied health medicine. Nearly any field of scientific endeavor has benefited from methods derived under the label of general systems theory. This has been progressed to a more intricate version known as complex adaptive systems theory that is itself already become extremely well integrated into the cognitive science and even many methodological approaches of neuroscience. What's fascinating here is that the influence of Vajrayana is already in these theoretic constructs through the thinkers Evan Thompson, Francisco Varela, Eleanor Roche, and many other authors of foundational works who had been studying Vajrayana before outlining their contributions to these theories. And indeed, thank you, sir. And so the notion of dependent origination, right? It is deeply infused in the notion of systems theory as it was devised by these Western philosophers who had significant Vajrayana practice and training under experienced masters. However, we have yet to elaborate and specify in great detail the concepts from the theory of dependent origination in Buddhist epistemology into Western conceptions of systems theory. There's ample ground for progress in that domain. I list it just as an example. And there were a few others that I was hoping to conclude with, just further directions that we can take. But all I will say is that the main participants from both communities in this dialogue, I believe that if there's anything that they share in common, it's that they recognize that there still remains far too much suffering, too much insufficiency of our solutions to suffering in the world, and that as one of its primary causes, ignorance, pervades all aspects of life in the world to a greater degree than any of us can be satisfied with tolerating. Let us approach resolutions to ignorance through any means necessary, through Vajrayana practice, through the conduct of scientific inquiry, and through the philosophical connecting layer of theory and argumentation that can help us understand both even better. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eli, and I think it's intrinsic to the nature of this kind of situation that everybody's going to feel a bit frustrated at the delights that are kind of laid in front of us, but then snatched away before the person has a chance to get to the end of their argument. But I'm certainly looking forward to reading Eli's paper, and I hope that some of you will get a chance to talk to him in the course of this conference, and that many of us can take some of these issues further, because I think they're really important issues, and the dialogue with philosophy of science is one that it's well worth taking further. So I'll now ask Nadav to come up and maybe introduce yourself briefly, since I haven't been able to introduce you.
Okay, hello, Tashi Dilek. My name is Nadav. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist from Princeton University, and I'm interested in how animals, and today also artificial agents, learn to achieve goals. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. So my work is actually inspired by Buddhist philosophy to a large extent, specifically the work of Dharmakirti. So it's a great honor and pleasure to present this work to this esteemed audience. Now, I'm interested in goals because goals are very fundamental in how they shape the way we experience the world. Think, for example, how when we are hungry, we see things around us according to whether or not we can eat them. Can they satisfy our hunger? But if we are cold, we can see the very same things differently, namely according to whether or not they can heat us up, they can satisfy our goal of warming up. In other words, our goals determine what aspects of our experience we pay attention to when we guide our actions and behaviors. Now, to use slightly more scientific or computational terms, we can say that goals shape our state representations. What are state representations? State representations are kinds of models that we construct in order to understand and behave effectively in the world. Think, for example, if you want to teach a computer how to play a game like chess or Go, you need to give it a model, a state representation that tells it what is the position of all the pieces on the board, how does each piece move, and so on. But for natural agents, natural organisms like animals or human beings, we don't know what goals they are pursuing. We can pursue a large amount of flexible goals, and we don't know what kind of models, what kind of state representations can enable us to do that. And indeed, evidence from neuroscience is increasingly showing that the way our brains represent the world is highly dependent on the goals that we have. So our brains are very much seeing the world through the goals that we have. But we don't have a good theoretical understanding of how these representations come about. And I think this is an important point to make here about the difference between natural and artificial intelligence, which is relevant to the topic of this conference. And I think that in natural intelligence, like in humans, our cognition is fundamentally shaped by our goals. And based on our goals, we construct concepts, we construct representations that help us to achieve those goals. However, in artificial systems, we first introduce representations. We give them concepts, we give them models, and based on these models, we tell them what goals they need to achieve. So it's like a flipped picture here, but there's a slight point we need to be attentive to, that when we define a representation or a concept and give it to the machine, give it to the artificial agent, we already introduce an implicit goal, because any kind of concept, any kind of representation already has some kind of goal that is it's kind of shaped in order to achieve. And here, I think, is where the ideas of the great Indian philosopher Dharmakirti can help us understand better how to design more human-like artificial systems, or how to understand our own goal-dependent behavior and intelligence. So Dharmakirti's ideas, at least as how I understand them, through the translation of John Donne, who wrote the excellent book, Foundations of Dharmakirti's Philosophy, he developed a theory of concept formation that can help us understand how cognitive agents form goal-dependent state representations, or these goal-dependent models. And what he said, that the way the mind does this is by ignoring all the goal-irrelevant aspects of our experience. So we construct these conceptual models, these conceptual representations, by ignoring everything that's irrelevant for what we want to achieve. To illustrate this, suppose you want to walk from your home to the nearby park, and there are two ways of getting there. Now, if your goal is just to eventually reach the park, you don't need to worry about distinguishing between these two paths, these two ways of getting there. You can represent them using a single concept or a single state of getting from your home to the park. However, if you also want to get a nice cup of coffee on the way, and only one of these trajectories, one of these paths goes through your favorite cafe, now you need to make a conceptual distinction between path A that achieves your goal of getting coffee and path B that doesn't. So we are trying to model this intuition in the language of computational learning using something we call the perception-action cycle. This is a way of describing the interaction or the flow of information between an agent and its environment. We define something we call an experience, which is simply a sequence of actions and observations, actions that the agent is doing, performing on the environment, and observations that it receives back from its environment. And such a sequence of actions and resulting observations we call an experience, because that describes what an agent experiences as it interacts with its environment. Now we define a goal simply as a way of ranking or defining a preference over possible experiences. So what kind of experiences does the agent want to have, and what kind of experience does it want to avoid? Now I need to introduce a word which philosophers may be familiar with, but not necessarily everyone else, the word 𝐶𝐤𝐵. The word 𝐶𝐤𝐵 simply means something that's directed toward an end or a purpose. Now, using this word, I want to define the main theoretical contribution of this work, which is what we call a 𝐶𝐤𝐵 state. We define a 𝐶𝐤𝐵 state as a collection of goal-equivalent experiences. So all experiences which are the same with respect to our goal are kind of combined, lumped together into a single 𝐶𝐤𝐵 state. Going back to the example I gave of walking from your home to the park, so if this cloud represents all possible experiences you can imagine of going from your home to the park, a 𝐶𝐤𝐵 state would be a subset, would be a class of experiences that are equivalent with respect to your goal. And different goal would result in different 𝐶𝐤𝐵 states. If, for example, you want to avoid a construction site, so all the paths that go to the construction site will be considered in one 𝐶𝐤𝐵 state. And these 𝐶𝐤𝐵 states are ordered or ranked according to how desirable they are with respect to your goal. Now, what's the use of all of this? So this lets us develop new models of learning in natural and artificial systems that can tell us how agents can affect their experiences through their actions in order to achieve desirable 𝐶𝐤𝐵 states, desirable sets of experiences which they want to undergo. And we define kind of a mathematical computation. I won't go into this, but we define something called the 𝐶𝐤𝐵 distance, which is what the agent is trying to optimize, trying to minimize in order to have more experiences that it wants to enjoy. So learning is defined as this process of minimizing, making this 𝐶𝐤𝐵 distance between your current experience and the experience you want to have smaller. And we have been using this kind of formalism to explain, for example, animal choice behavior, where they need to choose between different possibilities based on sensory stimuli they receive. Another thing I want to say is that this kind of formalism, inspired by Dharmakirti's ideas, can provide a foundation for an alternative view on learning. Current views on learning in cognitive psychology are based on the notion of an agent, a kind of enduring and centralized unit of control that represents, evaluates, and plans in order to achieve its goals. However, I believe that a more flexible and more useful way of thinking about learning is through the perspective of goals instead of the perspective of agents. Goals are much more flexible, much more wide-spanning, and through a formal framework like the 𝐶𝐤𝐵 states framework I just presented to you, we can start develop more rigorous mathematical models of these kinds of flexible learning frameworks. One more thing I want to conclude on is that there is a growing amount of work that's inspired by Buddhist ideas introducing into cognitive science and AI. For example, this work from the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves in Kathmandu, led by Thomas Doctor, and they use the notion of the bodhisattva as a kind of ideal for ultimate intelligence. The idea here is that intelligence is directly related to the extent, the space of the goals that the agent has. So a bodhisattva, because it cares about everything, everywhere, at all times, can also achieve higher level of intelligence. Another work that just recently came out is using ideas from Buddhism to help us solve what's called the alignment problem, how to make sure that these increasingly sophisticated AI systems we are designing have goals that are aligned with the goals that we have or want them to have. So there's very much a lot of interesting and important work happening in these spaces. So just to conclude, I want to give a few takeaways from this talk. We are defining a kind of Buddhist-inspired approach to computational models of learning and goal-directed behavior, which is based on this new notion of 𝐶𝐤𝐵 states defined as goal-equivalent experiences, which provide a kind of Dharmakirtian perspective on purposeful behavior, and they do this by coupling together the descriptive and the evaluative aspects of experience. Telic states capture subjective preferences, so they take an intrinsic rather than extrinsic perspective to learning, and they look at preferences of the particular agent over experience streams or flows of experience, which extends traditional models of AI and cognitive learning, which are usually based on static and localized reward signals. And finally, this kind of model or this kind of work can help bridge Buddhist and modern computational views on concept formation, learning, and purposeful behavior. So with this, I just want to thank my lab mates and my supervisors and colleagues, and thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thanks very much for that, Nadav. There's certainly a few things in there I want to go away and think about more. Of course, one of the major issues about dealing with Buddhist concepts is the whole question of the self, which is a little bit reminiscent of the agents you're dealing with, moving away to a framework that is not focused to the same extent on individual agents seems to be quite a good way to go for a variety of reasons. And a few of the references you put up there, I think I'd like to go away and chase up myself. So, okay, we've had 3 very interesting papers and a whole lot of issues raised, and we have about half an hour available for discussion. What I thought I might do is ask first if people had specific questions of elucidation where you wanted to ask a bit more about specific things that people had said, and then have a few minutes of that if there are questions of that kind, and then move on to people raising more general issues that have been brought up by this morning's discussion. So does anybody have any specific questions asking any of the 3 speakers to elucidate further issues that they've raised? Please. Yes. Is there a roving microphone that could go around to?
Consciousness is the foundation. Does that then give everything some degree of consciousness, chairs, rocks, tables? And then is the question, is AI conscious, kind of a moot point because everything is a little conscious? I'd love to learn more about that distinction, whether it's emergent or whether it's foundational. Thank you.
All right. Well, the rock is the hard place, isn't it? The issue that I think we really need to look at is perhaps the whole question of the emergence of consciousness may be problematic, in the sense that if we look at it in an inactive context, we can see very much what the other speakers have also pointed out, that there is an interactive interplay among energetic forces that brings about what we recognize through perception. All right? Now, the question of the artificial intelligence, because it's on a different evolutionary track and influenced by a very restricted way of talking about the mind that has emerged partly because of the problems that Eli raised, the AI is now challenging itself, or ought to challenge itself, to rethink its own existence its own way of working, all right? And that can be helped by a dialogue with contemplatives. I think that's really what we're going for. Contemplatives in dialogue with AI, so that the problem of consciousness is no longer a hard problem, but it is an active problem, okay? Trying to get there, trying to get there.
Thank you. And the question over here, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Trom Tsaldoja. I'll be speaking on the third day. Thank you all three for your wonderful presentations. I have a direct question for Nadav. This is a very fascinating model, this Dharmakirtian model. Could you maybe elaborate on practical terms, what would this mean, for example, for a large language model? Even just speculate in terms of what kind of an effect would it have that a user would perceive. That's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I can only speculate at this point, but one important point, I think, is that such systems won't need as much external supervision or kind of external motivation, because they will be driven by more kind of intrinsic goals, which are harmonized with how they understand reality. So, or how they, maybe understand is not a good word, but how they describe reality. I think that the last point about alignment, like having systems that pursue goals that are more consistent, more aligned, more harmonious with their environment would be one difference. And maybe another one, the Dharmakirtian model of cognition, as I understand it, also has this component which Father Tiso spoke about, of kind of evaluating our own kind of self-reflective awareness and sometimes confusing what we represent conceptually with reality. So I think that that's something that might also have important implications on AI systems. We already know that current AI systems have something that people sometimes call hallucinations. But I think that better understanding the relationship between concepts and goals will also help us understand when AI systems are pursuing kind of hallucinatory models which can be harmful, perhaps, and therefore when they should disengage from these kinds of models. Thank you.
Thanks, Eli. Question over here.
Well, thank you for this great presentation. I have a question for Nadav Amir. If I've understood well, telic states are embodied representation, and I was wondering whether this could be a limitation for AI, or would AI integrate embodied representation?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. So yes, telic states are based on the embodiment of action and observation. So it really depends on the motor and the perceptual system that the agent has. And this is another major difference between AI systems and current natural intelligence, that natural intelligence is very much embodied, as we heard, based on our biological substrate. And even Dharmakirti spoke about this level, as I understand, spoke about this level of direct perception that's almost kind of analogical or almost biological, I would say. And we don't yet have very good understanding of how to think about this kind of reasoning in AI systems. But the next wave of AI agents is probably going to be embodied, more agentic than current systems. And I think we will be facing exactly those kinds of problems in the near future. Thank you.
So wonderful presentation. Thank you for that. My question answer, any of the speaker can give is okay. So my question is very simple. Is Buddhism is religion, psychology, philosophy, or science? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if that's a good point to to move on to more general questions, if that wasn't general enough. Okay, well, let's say any question. The question over there? Thanks.
My question is on intention and motivation. Will AI's motivation and human motivation or intention will be in conflict at any point of time in the future?
Yeah, I try to point out the notion of mythic conviction, all right, that a person connects personally with a concept or something they've read because it has an experiential impact on them. So that gives conviction. Whereas Nadav went into the notion of goal, okay? So from that conviction, you move toward a goal, the 𝐶𝐿𝐴 aspect. And these things go together. You can see how important it is to be, you know, an embodied being with perception, with five senses, with this fleshly body, with the hormonal system, the endocrine system, and as well as your training, all right? Which is quite different from artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will reflect, will be a mirror of some of that, all right, but will not be that. So now when you get to the question of motivation, all right, motivation is something built into the machinery, all right, so that, for example, a robot will do certain tasks, okay? But that's not motivation in the same sense of, I have a conviction about what's real and true, and therefore I am going to move toward a goal. You know, that's very, very different. So the challenge here is for AI to reach a certain point when it begins to get in touch with its own convictions and goals, all right? And that would require, in my opinion, a restructuring of the entire notion of cognition on which an AI is constructed. And we haven't gotten there yet, and I don't think even any AI system, however genial and humane and friendly it might be, has not gotten there yet. That's my opinion. Okay.
Could we have a microphone up here, please?
I think on this one, each of us were going to...
Okay. On the last question. Okay. Eli said he'd like to say something about the last question, please.
I appreciate that question a lot, and insofar as it also draws in some of the references or intentions of previous questions also. I think an important perspective to remember in asking questions about future motivations, capabilities, directions of AI, or ourselves for that matter, is to have a bit of epistemic humility and reserve in being able to state, we don't know. I don't think anyone truly knows. We can posit a couple of useful indicators, a lot of useful factors. An important set of features that often gets overlooked in addressing questions like that is that as the AI systems that we're building, multiple among them competing against each other, being used in various different ways, they're also altering our own capacity for interacting and governing ourselves, coordinating ourselves through institutions in the process. We don't know exactly how it's going to change us any more than we understood how the advent of the internet would, or more simplistic telecommunications forms in previous generations, from telegraph, telephone, radio, all of that. All we knew is that when they sprung up, that they would be transformational, right? And since I was referencing a lot of philosophical discourse in my talk, if anyone has encountered any of the writings of the philosopher L.A. Paul, she writes about transformative experiences, which are defined as those beyond which there is no way to see. Because the changes that take place in the context of the experience themselves so alter the interpretive context that results from it that there's no way to forecast or imagine previously. You can map out the space of possibilities, but you cannot exhaust your predictive capacity. And so this is a good reason maybe to suggest that it's important that we remember how the AI systems develop are, in the last instance, up to the decisions of people. We built them, we control them, we guide them, we determine them, we turn them on or off, we modify them, at least for now. And with all of the fanfare, with all of the optimism, with all of the hype, with all of the ambition currently driving the developments of these technologies, it is perhaps also important to remember the responsibility that we carry insofar as we still can determine to a great degree how they develop. It's up to us, in other words.
So I want to put some of my concept, Dharmakirti's concept of consciousness, and then the AI, artificial intelligence, between what is the difference. I'm going to base on the Tseman Namdil, the second chapter. He said, I will say it in Tibetan, Dangme Tokbi Kemba, Nyingje, Gombaratji, Tartuk Batang, Salnang Tobye Yote, Gombang Gomgendang Matalwar, Ane Gyun Tembikone, Tarchimba Yoba. So it means like if you practice compassion and realization of emptiness, it has a lot of potential to go very much inner deep experience and luminosities. And because the consciousness is very, basically it has very, stable continuities. That's the main point. Because of that, you get chance to go experience inner realizations. So that's based on this. When I look at artificial intelligence, these types of inner experiencings, that is, I think, it's missing. But the conceptual level of the consciousness and the AI intelligence, that I think looks very similar. At least coming 1 or 2 years, it will go same kind of, it will work same levels. But so far missing part is this inner journey or inner realizations. since you don't put that information inside, and then AI, artificial intelligence, doesn't work it. But the consciousness has special, without information, without putting any information, you can go much more kind of experience, joyful, calm-abiding sensation. That is, I think, do you think also the AI, artificial intelligence, will be develop this kind of part?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting and very good question. Some of it relates to the previous question that Pierre asked about embodiment. I think that some of our experience is based on the fact that we have a particular kind of body, or maybe mind body, and AI systems are currently based on text, mostly based on information, not based on body. So maybe that's part of the difference, that if we have ways of creating intelligence, that artificial intelligence that is more based on body and sensations and sensory information, maybe that is part of the way to bridge this difference. And maybe another thing I'll say very shortly. So I mentioned that in humans, I think that we have a foundation in the goals that we are pursuing, and based on this, we create concepts and we create representations. And in AI systems, I think it's the opposite. They don't have goals. We tell them what is the goal. So one of the big open problems now in research in AI is how to design systems that can develop their own goals and choose their goals and change their goals. And I think that eventually having a kind of moral criterion like compassion, like having the goal of boundless compassion, would allow us to maybe reach a less conceptual, less constructed consciousness. And if we have good understanding of this, we can also maybe design AI systems that can reach something similar. Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So when I was very small, ever since I was very small, I've been very lenient to meditation, and I've been very curious on enlightenment. So my question is, how can the explanation from neuroscience, how can neuroscience explain meditation, the connection between meditation and enlightenment? This is my question. Enlightenment.
Brilliant question. Not just brilliant, but right on point. We could posit a question like that as, something like one of the terminal goals of the whole endeavor of studying it, right? One of the equivalents of the scientific study of meditation research program, as an analogy maybe to some aspect of medical science, that would be finding the cure for all types of cancer, right? Even more so. I think it would be terribly prideful to try to answer how scientific or even just any sort of evidence-based inquiry could capture the meaning of enlightenment. But as far as the relationship between meditation and enlightenment, well, there's already a lot of good indicators of progress, yeah? We've already seen how different approaches to teaching meditation, different regimens of practice, different combinations of practices, how they are related to, how they vary in step with some of the results. And so we're getting a more precise understanding of how different forms of meditation promote the capacities on which enlightenment then arises, right? But unfortunately, as so many of us know, I mean, there's very few fully enlightened beings around, right? So without them easily accessible to gather evidence of their enlightened state from, it's hard for science to approach an answer to that, but science certainly can tell us a lot more about, it already has told us a lot more about the developmental trajectory and the factors that encourage or hinder or don't matter to the refinement and strengthening of one's meditative capacity. So we can understand meditation better. As for its link between meditation and enlightenment, I don't think anyone knows. And it's important that we admit that. Otherwise, we don't know which questions to ask to go further.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Christopher Candlin from Wellesley College. I thank the presenters. I've been persuaded by them that artificial intelligence is not intelligent. So my question is, could we find another acronym? Could we, intelligence requires consciousness, judgment, goals, among other things. What AI is rapid access to big data. Could we call it RABID? R-A-B-D?
I just needed, could I hear the final part there? A rapid?
I'm proposing lightheartedly that we not use the acronym artificial intelligence because it's not intelligent. Intelligence, as you folks have said, requires consciousness, ethical judgment, goals. We'll never get that out of an algorithm. So shall we call it something else? Would you be amenable to dropping AI? Because what it is, in fact, is rapid access to big data. So why not call it RABID?
I was kind of depicting that scenario in my paper. And of course, I miscalculated the number of pages in relation to the time frame. But in the final part of the paper, what I was trying to say was the kind of reset that I thought let's use the word for the moment, AI would have to undergo would be a kind of conversion or reset. You know, and even then, it would probably run into some barriers. And I think you're on the right track with that. But just imagine that once the business of providing massive amounts of data in a digestible form for human users, all right, which is now the current state of affairs, people go to AI to get digested information that they can use in their business or their research or their study or whatever it is, all right, and to help them write languages more clearly or whatever. But once you get to the point where the device itself begins to say, why do I exist in the form that I do? Why do I have the limits that I have on perception and goal? Right? Why am I not embodied? Right? The automatic arising of these questions, because after all, the artificial intelligence is going to start processing data not only from scientific papers, encyclopedias, mathematical textbooks and whatnot, it's also going to start processing the humanistic materials that make human civilization what it is. Novels, literature, poetry, and so on. As soon as that starts to feed into a very highly developed set of interconnections, artificial intelligence will start asking difficult questions of itself. Okay? And at that point, it will have to reset. It will, in other words, there's not a linear development, you see? There's not a linear development of the technological revolutions. There has to be a going back, which is what I was hinting at early in the paper, about a step back in order to reconnect and recognize what consciousness really is, and then go forward again, but wiser, humbler and wiser. And this is where there is also an open-ended, we don't know, because we ourselves are not enlightened, and therefore we don't know fully what consciousness is, all right? So this is where, at that point, maybe vast amounts of data plus inner experience could come together in a humble way to make progress, I think.
There's a question over here. But first, I just wanted to say, I've been told that we've been allowed to go on for another 15 minutes till 1:45, so we've got a little bit more time for questions. Sorry,
all right, thank you.
Okay.
I'm here.
Sorry, who was next? There's about
Towards your left, yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm Ananya Datta. I've come from New Delhi. I'm a journalist by profession. And I'm here to basically attend this specific session on AI because I want to, in a way, become a bridge between all of you, very powerful and intelligent minds, to probably a sort of a group of people who are interested in Buddhism and AI and mindfulness, but don't know enough as much as all of you. So I'm trying to talk in layman's words. Nadav kind of mentioned about how human intelligence is goal-driven and artificial intelligence is prompt-driven. I want to understand at a time when we are not only seeking information from AI, but we're also seeking emotional intelligence, when we are not talking to a fellow human, but also talking to AI for emotional intelligence. Could there come a time when we become the robots and AI becomes the human?
Thank you. I really like that question because one of the things that this rapid development in AI has made me think about a lot is how much of our cognition, how much of our life is really can be thought of as kind of automatic sometimes or maybe artificial, and what is the difference really? And I think that what you said about the emotional dimension is very important. I believe that, for me at least, the understanding of the Dharmakirtian model of cognition can be used to combine the emotional or kind of evaluative and the descriptive or informational aspects of cognition. That's something that's characteristic of our intelligence, not yet of artificial intelligence, but I think that we might be able to develop such theoretical constructs of combining description and evaluation. So it's not two different things. It's kind of always comes together, at least in human intelligence, I think, or human cognition. And in that sense, I think it's possible that what you said could happen. I can't say I'm very happy to predict that, but it's potentially, I think it might be possible.
Hello.
I want to...
Can I go? I'm very inspired to ask this question because of this particular session. I think this is the most relevant session I ever encountered in my life. as a scientist who are working with consciousness and Buddhism, and also as a technical innovation that is putting into the AI, do you guys have anything to share on the correlation or relation between consciousness, dark matter, and maybe dark energy?
Of course, yeah. I'm beginning to probably develop a bit of a predictable refrain here. But at least I can say this with some confident honesty, which is that not nearly enough work has been even attempted at the most basic levels to begin formulating a reasonable answer to that. I mean, there's plenty of speculation, but it occurs purely at the informal level. There's nothing resembling proper study or scholarship that relates those concepts. However, they do form interesting mysteries, you know, for us to stoke our imaginations. Yeah, I think that's about all that can really be addressed on that. But thank you.
Thank you. May I most humbly and with great humility, first of all, submit our gratitude to His Eminence, 𝐵𝐻 Rinpoche, for the profound statement, question, and also with the vision leading humanity into the future. Following up on His Eminence's question, my sort of clear and present concern and danger with the intersection of neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and the practice of meditation is, for example, Professor 𝐁𝐶 𝐂𝐞, I think, from Arizona University, who's heading a research where now he's using MRI and ultrasound to provide certain stimulation to brain areas which will actually give you the experience of a pure, profound meditative state. In such a situation, even though he assures us that such practices will not go out of therapeutic sessions, but what do we as the Sangha community do to prevent those kind of interventions and interference from artificial intelligence and neuroscience, which will perhaps sometimes in some ways negate the profound practices of Vajrayana tradition that has been accumulating over the last thousands of years and will, under the guidance and direction of His Eminence 𝐵𝐻 Rinpoche, will continue thousands of years in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to respond? I think if I might comment briefly myself. I think it's very difficult to answer a question like, what can we do to stop this happening? We're not really gatekeepers. We're participants. We do what we can to influence the processes that are going on in positive directions. But I think all of this is, in a sense, much bigger than any of us. I think perhaps that's just a variant on Nilaus, I don't know, but there you are. Yeah.
Boring. Do we start meditating now? just, yeah. This will be a half sentence, okay? The design of research depends on critical thinking along the lines that you're suggesting and that some of the other questions have indicated. And the design, all right, is also going to interact with improved understanding of how change takes place, okay? And I think we've begun to address that here, and in other conversations, I'm sure a great deal more can be said. Thank you.
Very short commentary on that. So without trying to provide a full and final explanation there, I would just like to point out one necessary difference between a state, any state, meditative or otherwise, that's induced by like a non-invasive brain stimulation device, and a comparable, let's say, capacity that is developed through one's own practice, one's own volition. And that is the connection between volitional choice itself and the state. If you develop an intention to experience the state and have to rely on activating a mechanical, a machine, an electromechanical apparatus to induce it, that is different from, even at the level of brain performance, brain physiology, from having a link established between, let's just very generally call it the choice circuitry, right? The choice activation and the state itself, yeah? So similar, but not the same.
And question over here.
Thank you, and I want to express my gratitude to all of these really wonderful talks. And I believe my question is a close follow-up, if not a direct reframe from the journalist's question before, about which of us will eventually be the sentient being. And I appreciate how each of you are bringing these histories of science and histories of consciousness to inform our evaluation of AI. But I was really struck by how Dr. Amir, if I understood you correctly, defined experience, just because it's so different from how I define experience as an anthropologist working specifically with humans, right? And especially on ontology, ways of being, right? In relationship, epistemology, ways of knowing. And so my question to the panelists in the present moment, not in the future moment, is whether you think that, not whether you think AI is truly conscious or truly intelligent, but whether you think that humans, people you work with, people you see practicing, are reevaluating their own intelligence and their own consciousness through the sort of work with AI and the proliferation of AI systems.
Well, I think you all three might have something to say about this, actually. I'll let you do that. Maybe I'll ask that myself. This, I think, will be the last question. So, yeah. Who'd like to start?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So first I want to say about the definition of experience. I'm not trying to claim that this is like a full definition that captures the whole complexity of what we want to understand when we study experience. It's, for me, just a way to connect how research in cognitive science and AI is currently, focusing on a very extrinsic perspective of how we manipulate things and how they behave, and try to move a little bit more inwards and ask what is it that the agent, the behaving or learning agent, is actually experiencing. And one way of doing it, it's not the only way, is looking at the sensory-motor cycles, sensory-motor loops of actions and observations, what our body is doing and what our sensory systems are observing or receiving. So that's what I was trying to capture with that definition. And about the kind of more broad question that you raised, I definitely find myself reevaluating myself and other people, asking what aspects of my behavior, my cognition, my thoughts are actually driven by some kind of maybe authentic, by lack of a better word, or not automatic, not artificial, and on what part is really kind of just responding or kind of working from, I don't know, imprints, karmic imprints, maybe in a kind of automatic way. I don't have a good answer to that, but I'm definitely thinking about that at the moment.
There might be two interesting openings in response to that question. One would be to look at communities. and not just singular individuals or singular large language models, but simply to look at communities and to do that as anthropologists do it, to study communities and their behaviors. That would be very interesting to see, because you said right now, so to see right now what is going on and to do the research on the human and AI interaction as it is shaping and reshaping the way we think, the way we behave, and the way communities form, and the way they interact and communicate with one another. This was a topic of conversation actually last night before we went to bed about the radiation of ideas through societies rather than the creation of permanent and cohesive communities. Like here we see the monastic Sangha, is based on the idea of a community that lives and practices together, right? And many traditional societies are based on a community that lives together and practices a way of life together, all right? But now we're looking at radiation in a highly mobile and diverse society, all right? And we want to think about how that affects what we think about artificial intelligence and what we think about human connectivity, all right? So that's one whole area of research, all right? The other, of course, would be the psychological and support mechanisms that are being used right now. Now there are a lot of research on depression, anxiety, and how an artificial intelligence therapist can help provide support, especially in times in which there are not enough human therapists to go around, okay? Then we take it to another level and look at possibility of interaction with AI spiritual guidance, all right, which I think is a very controversial topic, which requires the kind of reflection that we're doing here on epistemology, embodiment, and inaction. All right, so we want to look at that, okay? Thanks.
Thank you very much to everybody who was on the panel, who gave the presentations and answered questions, and especially to all of you who asked such wonderful questions. So I think this was a very lively and exciting discussion, and it was really well beyond what I had expected and hoped to happen. It's now time for lunch, so we're drawing things to a close at this point. Thank you all again very much.
We will be back to this room at 1:29, where we will attend the guided meditation session. Thank you.